Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us in the session today. We will be starting pretty soon, but while we wait, I just wanted to give you an update again. Thank you for joining this webinar, and we are hosted with the PreSales Collective. PreSales Collective, as you know, is a community for pre-sales professionals to be able to join, learn from each other, have networking opportunities, etc. Free to join. If anybody on the call hasn't joined yet, which I believe most of you have, please feel free to join our community. We'll host webinars and things like this very often. We have face-to-face meetups in most parts of the world, so it's really a very beneficial thing to get involved in, especially when if you're navigating your pre-sales career. For today, I would love to welcome the esteemed Jameel Rehman. Jameel is a former two-time top 1% AE at huge enterprises such as Telstra and Cisco. He has turned to performance coaching, and he does mentoring for tech AEs. Jameel has aimed to fix the huge gap in quality tech sales education. His approach is groundbreaking and very unique. It's transforming non-technical sellers into elite, trusted technological advisors. And he uses the latest in neuroscience, psychology, bio-optimisation, and much, much more. In this session, Jameel will unpack what emotional intelligence really means when you're in sales and pre-sales, obviously, and how to master your sixth sense to get ahead in the tech sales game. We are very happy to have you, Jameel. I can't wait to get into this. This content is going to be eye-opening, and I think it's going to be very entertaining for the people here. And with that, I'll hand it over to you. But before I do, I just want to say, everyone feel free to continue chatting in the chat box. But when it comes to any kind of questions that you have for Jameel, please use the Q&A function for that. I'll only be moderating on the Q&A for any questions that you might have. We will have question time at the end. And as we go along, depending on how many questions there are, we might have a few stops in between as well. But please sit back, enjoy, and ask your questions in the Q&A when you need. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jameel. Over to you.
Thank you, Yolanda. Hello, PSC Collective. I am very excited to be here. Thank you very much for the fantastic intro, Yolanda, as well. Yeah, really excited to share this with you guys. Like Yolanda said, this is different, innovative stuff. I actually just looked through the participant list, and I actually think I see one of my own students in here already. Is Kristen Wu? I think there's not many Kristen Wu's around, so reach out to me, Kristen, if that's you. But look, let me share my screen in traditional tech parlance. This masterclass I've put together for you, I think will completely change the way that you perceive EQ and a lot of soft skills in technology sales. I'm going to get right into it. Like Yolanda said, there's going to be time for questions. I do talk fast, and this will be a little bit dense. So, there are going to be spaces for questions. Put those in the chat. Very happy to answer anything open source. And then we'll have a bit of a Q&A and some further discussion at the end as well. But yes, let's get into it, shall we? So, emotional intelligence in sales. In this masterclass, I'm going to modernize what the concept of emotional intelligence actually is for you, not just professionally, but personally as well. I'm going to talk to you about what the actual systems and practices we can develop within ourselves to improve our EQ, and how do we apply this modern EQ intelligence into sales today, which is very important for us as trusted technology advisors and pre-sellers. Okay. Yolanda gave a bit of a spiel about me before. 2x top 1% account executive at Cisco and Telstra Enterprise. I was Cisco's #1 mid-market AE in 2023. I've gone my entire career without missing quota with an average of 152%. And now I've made the transition into teaching enterprise technology sales to the next generation of tech sellers, because I understand inherently the massive gap in quality tech sales education. Outside of that, this is a bit broader about me. I'm not just a technology salesperson. I'm a multi-dimensional individual, as I like to say. I have a creative background, and that's why I like to integrate and synthesize different elements of music, creativity, spirituality, modern science into what I do and what I teach. And that's why I'm very confident that you won't get the education and depth of knowledge anywhere in the world right now when it comes to technology sales, enablement and education for you guys. So let's get into the basics. Let's get into modernizing EQ for you all. So with emotional intelligence, we hear about it a lot, but it's often not really defined. It can be a bit fluffy. We hear about empathy a little bit, but what does it actually mean? And the best way to define emotional intelligence that I've said is that EQ is about leveraging your own emotions and the knowledge of other people's emotions towards positive outcomes. How can we leverage our emotional knowledge of the people around us as a collective and channel that energy towards positive outcomes? Now, we talk about empathy a lot in EQ, but realistically, there's actually two internal practices within ourselves and with other people that we can practice. Those are called interoception and exteroception. That's based around neuroscience. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. So to give you this refresher on emotional intelligence and why it's so important in sales is that we are dealing with people. We might be in technical sales, but all technology are tools to solve people problems. So therefore, we need to understand the people that we are dealing with inherently. And people are emotional first, logical second. I know that we talk about in B2B world, it's all about the logic and the ROI and the metrics. But realistically, all of our customers who are making logical B2B decisions are actually hardwired into making B2C or consumer grade emotional based decisions. And once you understand that and really dig into that, that's when you really get into the trusted personal network of your customers and really build those quality relationships you're looking for to make sales easier and to solve your customers' problems. So it's really important that when you think of people, think of them on a spectrum of rational to emotional, because our emotions are powerful. They can override our logic many times, which we'll explore further down. And again, if that emotion is actually strong enough, we will rationalize our emotions with logic and reasoning, right? Think about the last time you tried to give yourself a little sweet treat, all the reasons why you want to buy it, justify that nice purchase, right? That is us logifying and sort of rationalizing that feeling of desire that we want within ourselves and going, yeah, we deserve this. This is totally fine. So when it comes to EQ, this is what I'm really excited about for this is giving you a secret to the universe, okay? You might know this fella, Nikola Tesla, famous electrical engineering pioneer, basically invented the electrical systems that we have today. And one of the things that he said is that if you want to find secrets of the universe, you must think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, okay? Energy, frequency, and vibration. And you are really going to unlock different elements of the universe that we operate in and completely change your perspective on the world, okay? Now, when he was talking about this, he was very much focused on electricity, okay? And understanding electricity, power, how that works. But what he probably didn't recognize and has accidentally innovated later is that our emotions are energy, okay? Emotions are actually energy in motion, okay? And our emotional energy that we give off, the vibe, is a real thing. And our emotional energy, it travels in waves, okay? It has various frequencies that now, thanks to the latest in science and technology, we can actually measure in hertz using something called an EEG. And we actually sense this energy through our nervous systems, through the metaskills that we're going to talk about today, which is exteroception and interoception. Okay, so now as science has progressed over time, we are making progressive evolutions of what we know, not just about the external world, but our internal world, right? We are all busy talking about AI and the latest in compute in the external world, but there is so much more to be learned about ourselves and our internal world, and even understanding our brains and our emotions through things like the EEG. I'm not going to pronounce the EEG because that is way past my vocabulary capability. But thanks to this latest development, we can actually track human emotions, right? Using our primary brain waves, different frequencies that we have here, using the EEG, we can actually map emotions and functions of these different brain waves and how they relate to us as people. Okay, so some examples there, our gamma waves, when we're at our highest, most at our highest personal state, that's the highest frequency. And that's when you talk about, sometimes out in the world, you talk about, that's a high vibe that's out there. But as you go down, further down the Hertz measure, we go down into various levels of states. Now, the beta state is usually what we're usually in most of the day, when we are stressed about our pipeline and trying to think about how we solve that customer's problem. And it's also a useful way, it's basically the doing frequency. This is what we are doing every day. That's our busy frequency, and that's our active frequency. But if we stay in this for too long throughout the day, through anxiety, through stress, through pressure, then it does start to damage us. Ideally, you want to be operating in that alpha wave to theta wave, in a deep, relaxed state as much as you can, and sort of operating from that calm place, all the way down to delta waves, where you're in deep sleep and you are, in your unconscious mind and processing a lot of the things you've got from the day. But the real example that I want to give you from this is something that we all know, but haven't really, I guess, solidified as concrete evidence or concrete science, is the vibe. We've all heard about the vibe, and the vibe is real, okay? The vibe is actually a real thing. That emotional intelligence for us is actually within our systems, and is an intrinsic part of the human experience. We know this energy when we are out in the world around other people. For example, when you go to a live concert or you go to live sport, the tension in the air when you're scoring a goal, the great fun that you have when you're at a festival and you're connecting with people, that is the compounding effects of our emotional energy being broadcast into the world. On the opposite side of things, when you're in that drag of a meeting, there should have been an email and you're sitting there barely keeping yourself awake, that is a low vibe, right? That is our energy being drained from us because we are in misalignment of what we actually want to be doing or should be doing, instead of those all hands that could have been emails. Usually we understand this vibe through our developmental years, right? If you were to go, for example, some examples that I love to use are when you are in a room and you walk into a room and two people are having a hushed conversation and you can feel in the air that you shouldn't be there, or there's something that's going on. Or when you wake up and you're a kid and you can tell that your parents have had an argument or things aren't right in the home, that is us using our emotional attunement and sensing this emotional energy. Okay, so we are actually quite sensitive to it, no different to being sensitive to heat and pressure and all the other sensations that we have through our senses and nervous system as well. To go a little bit broader and maybe potentially even a little bit woo-woo, everything that we do, or the vast majority of what we do in technology and as people, operates on a vibrational spectrum, usually within the electromagnetic spectrum. And some examples that we've got here: light, sound, thought, all operate vibrationally. All the visible light that you see in the world operates at an extremely high frequency. The human voice a little bit lower. All of this measured in hertz. Even the GPUs that, the NVIDIA H100s, they're operating at megahertz. Some of the more technical PreSales will understand that. And even when we communicate technologically through Wi-Fi, we are communicating through a common platform of Wi-Fi at a common frequency to transmit information. Okay, so really what we're doing here, or what I'm trying to teach you, is that we are integrating the personal and technological worlds and getting better at that and converging that as we become more educated over time. Okay. Something that I love to say, and that will probably snap into place for a lot of you, is that the vibe is the tribe. And why do we say that? Is because it's very similarly to how we connect over Wi-Fi and connect all our devices over our private networks at home and our Wi-Fi networks, and connect it on a common platform. We resonate with those that we vibe with, that we're on that same emotional level, that same intellectual level, and that's what draws people in. We are broadcasting our signals, and the people that we love, that we connect with, our friends, when you feel that trusted space, when you feel like you can relax in the presence of people, that is you getting to synergy and synchronizing with the vibration and the vibration of a room. Okay, so I say this all the time: the vibe is the tribe. Okay, you need to trust the vibe within yourself, what that gut feeling is, which we'll talk about in a sec. You need to trust that vibe and seek that within to find your tribe, and use that as a primary tool as a salesperson, which we'll talk about later on. Okay, I'm going to take a breath there Any questions from that so far?
Just saw one pop into the Q&A. So it's from Paul, and he wants to know, how does someone create an environment where the tribe starts to vibe? Great question.
Great question. So that's the role of a leader, right? Your role as a leader is to broadcast the signal of what you are creating, okay? Your leadership, this is actually an advanced practice that I left out of this webinar because I wanted to stay like more surface. As a leader, psychological safety through a calm, intentional space and a grounded space for you as a leader in your presence is one of the most important things that you can do as a leader, not just professionally, but personally. Okay. So cultivating a grounded presence, trying to make sure that your own inadequacies or your own, lack of intention, lack of knowledge, your fears that you might have inside, the insecurities aren't being transmitted and broadcast into your space. Okay. And that is one of the deep ongoing practices of a leader, is to create that safe, intentional space on top of the direction that you take your team towards. Okay. So hopefully it's pretty meta, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better understanding, Paul.
Right. And then we have another question here, anonymous, from an entry level manager SDR, saying that, how do you get your tribe to notice when you're new to the game?
Sure. Yeah, I see that answer there.
To
The question.
notice you when you're new to the game. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So from an SDR perspective, it's to know your tribe is to actually know yourself. And that's, it's very philosophical, but it's true, where you need to know what you are about and why. Okay. So for example, under the context of emotional intelligence as an SDR, one of the best things that you can do is master tonality and the tone of your voice, and actually understand the context of the voice that you are using and the message that you are communicating through your conversations, right? So if you're entry-level SDR, you want to have a solid script that gives you the confidence to understand what you're talking about and the value proposition of what you're trying to engage, cold calling with. And then you want to be able to master your tonality of, just being inquisitive, not being defensive, and being okay with the fact that you're going to face a lot of rejection, a lot of setback. And if you can tolerate that with, just letting that energy pass through you of that, I'm not interested, send me an email in 6 months. And you go, look, totally understand. It's okay, right? In the context of sales, that's the fundamental learning that you should have as an SDR, is to master tonality and understand how your message is being received by customers.
Amazing. Thank you. I think with that, we can move on again. Thanks so much.
Sure thing. All right. So we understand the general context of what we're talking about here. The vibe is the tribe. What's our internal system as human beings that actually manages our emotional intelligence? And the emotion systems are basically our nervous systems. And there's 2 subsystems within the nervous system that are of particular importance. One is the limbic system, and one is the autonomic nervous system. And these are subsystems within our holistic nervous system. And essentially, the limbic system is one of sensing danger and basically regulates our physiological emotional responses to external stimuli. Okay, so how the limbic system works, usually top to bottom, is that the limbic system will receive stimuli from the nervous system, usually some sort of, let's just say, you've got a dog out there and you're afraid of dogs. Okay, so then you've received that, you see the dog there, the stimuli comes in through your eyes. Oh no, a dog. Okay, your amygdala is a register of your, is it a fear response or a reward response? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? And what it'll do is the amygdala will actually query the hippocampus, which is your memory association to positive and negative emotions. So in this example, for example, the hippocampus says that dogs are bad. And then the amygdala will go fear mode. Oh no, we have to prepare for this threat. Then what happens is the amygdala sends signals to the hypothalamus, which regulates our physiological response via an autonomic nervous system. So this would be fight or flight mode. So if you were, again, afraid of this dog, you're going into flight mode. Your adrenaline is pumping, your feet get a little bit lighter, your gut tightens up because you're getting ready to escape, okay? And then we have, lastly, the prefrontal cortex, and this is the most evolved part of our brains. And what the prefrontal cortex is essentially our highest function of ourselves, and that is telling us, hey, calm down, the dog is not a big deal, it's regulating us. This is our rational selves going, hey, we don't have to respond to this. It's not that big a deal. It's not that big a threat. Let's just calm down. Or again, if that emotional response and the physiological response is so strong, then it gets hijacked, and that's when we crack it. That's when we, lose it. We sprint, we panic, whatever that might be. Okay. So something that's worth mentioning in this, and where the basis of my education around this is around trauma. Okay, since the pandemic in particular, we've all become a lot more educated and aware of mental health, and a lot of that is resulted from trauma, developmental trauma. And what's really important to know and understand about trauma is that it is emotional wounding in your limbic system. It is actually damage and overstimulation of your limbic system when you were younger and a lot more fragile, okay? So for example, if that fear of dogs that we used in the previous example probably would have come from a potential dog attack or being scared of a dog when you were a child. And that was so overwhelming for you as a young, vulnerable kid that is now been healed over by your limbic system and your emotional system to go, we don't want that to ever happen again. And that's what creates that irrational fear. So to take this even further, when we talk about things like addiction, and that's a big problem out in society, most of our addictions and our little habits in life are actually reactions to our traumatic wounds in our childhood past that we haven't actually addressed. And things like alcoholism and drug use are actually distractions and soothing that deep pain, right? The analogy I use there is the shrapnel in your limbic system. That you might have been hurt, but the only really way that you can heal these emotional wounds and address this trauma is to actually observe that pain, acknowledge it, process it with the help of therapy, a bunch of different tools that we can talk about at a different time, and let that nervous system and let our minds heal properly from those experiences. And actually learned a lot about this and becoming increasingly trauma-informed about my own emotional wounds through my transformation and personal development process that you would have seen in the first slide. So this is where I'm bringing this knowledge and information about our human systems and integrating them into our technological systems. And hopefully this should give you a better understanding, again, not just professionally, but personally as well. Something that's also really interesting to understand, and a big revelation that I'm very excited to share today, is that when we talk about our sixth sense, this is our gut feelings, our intuitions, right? We understand what the sixth sense is. Again, it's sensing that vibe and the emotional tone of people. That is not our sixth sense, but is technically our first sense. And the reason why that is because the nervous system actually develops first in us in childhood, when we're in the womb, and again, is the common network against all the senses and receiving that sensory data from the external world. And we actually use emotional attunement of our nervous systems to our mothers as the first way of connecting with the outside world to understand what's going on. And what we do as children, we attune to heart rate, stress levels, hormones. That's why you've always got to keep, a pregnant woman very happy to make sure you've got a happy baby. Because if it's born under duress, then that does have psychological consequences for the child and developmental consequences later on as well. So understanding that is that realistically, we haven't been properly taught or educated what our senses are. And realistically, our nervous systems are our master sensory, master sense, really, because they integrate all the sensory information and provide those interpretations across all of our different organs and inside the mind. So keep that in mind, right? That should really change the way how you perceive the gut feel, the intuition, the vibe. This is actually our first sense. This is what we are innately integrated into us as human beings before anything else, which is pretty cool. So again, to put this all together more broadly, when we talk about the vibe, the gut, intuition, these are all elements of our nervous systems and our personal emotional intelligence. So for example, that gut feeling that we have is actually a second brain called the enteric nervous system. And our digestive gut actually produces the majority of our serotonin and dopamine through digestion. When we talk about, feeling in the heart, right? We actually have a cluster of neurons that's linked to the nervous system inside our heart, which is also a secondary brain. When it comes to intuition, from a scientific perspective, we're actually just processing sensory and subconscious data much faster than before we actually have the conscious thought of what this situation is, what's this problem, etc. So we're actually downloading a lot more meta information that we sort of keep in the background subconsciously, as opposed to actively thinking it before it becomes an active thought. And even more so, a lot of us in sales, particularly the people side of tech, the AEs, the BDMs, most of us pride ourselves on being empaths and very empathetic. And that is from a highly attuned nervous system. That is us actually having a keen sense of feeling the vibe. Sort of like how people have, a heightened sense of smell or really good hearing. Empaths usually have a very highly attuned nervous system. And unfortunately, a lot of that high nervous system attunement comes from overstimulation as a child, because as a survival mechanism, because they've grown up in emotionally or physically unstable households. And children are so sensitive and not really even conscious as beings until they're 7 years old. So again, this is all connecting this broader piece of the EQ puzzle into one holistic system for you to understand. Okay. Going to take another breath there. Hopefully this isn't too woo-woo. Any questions around that?
I'll see when questions come into the chat. I actually have a question on this, if I may, while we wait for people to type. I think everyone's very engaged, so they'll type while you're not talking, because we don't want to miss a thing, right? My question is, you spoke about the ANS system and being in having your fear response triggered, or your fight or flight. So for sales professionals, how can they identify whether they're in that survival triggered mode? And what steps can they actually take to shift that into a more confident, calm, and engaged state? Is that something that you're going to talk about, or is that something that you want to talk about now?
Well, I will talk about it literally in more depth in the next section, but happily to
Okay,
do.
awesome. There is another question, so I can park that if you're going to talk about it. I'm probably...
Yeah, I've got some practices. That's literally the next. Let's just
Amazing.
Okay.
All right, we have a question from JR, and he wants to know, he says, I'm curious if there is modern science and studies that provide tactical steps to tune further empathy.
That's a great question. So with that attunement, that's something that we practice, and I'll give you some actually how-tos in later on, and how to actually practice these skills. And most of it is just about analysis, observation, and then also a deeper knowledge of the self. And from a more, I guess, coaching and more spiritual perspectives, one of the things I love to say to people, especially leaders, is that you can only meet others as deeply as you've met yourself. And that is in regards to understanding your emotional depth and understanding of your own range, your own experiences, and then recognizing those vibrational frequencies, those shared experiences that pain in other people. Okay. So it really is, if you want to become a more empathetic person, you've probably got to express your own emotional internal blocks and explore those a little bit further, so then you can resonate at a deeper level with your people, whatever that might be.
Yeah. And I guess what you're also saying is that leads to a lot of self-awareness that you would need to start having to be able to bring that across, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, a big part of interoception is what we'll cover next, is about self-awareness first, and cultivating a deep sense of self-awareness. And again, that through my own transformation and awakening process, I had to do a lot of that, because I wasn't, I was very, so for example, right, just some personal examples here. I've got anxiety. I've had generalized anxiety, been medicated for a few years now. Didn't recognize that in myself until 2021. Spent a lot of time in my head and not in my body. And a lot of people, the vast majority of us, are actually not in our bodies, feeling and recognizing and acknowledging the sensations and the energetic flow within our bodies to understand that emotional intelligence very well. So things like breath work and therapy and practices that will get back into the body and out of the head, so you're not cognitively thinking, so you're not using your cognition, you're feeling. right? One of the things I love to say is that the future of humanity is not about thinking more, it's about feeling more. And why I say that is that thinking is already taken over by AI and things like that. Empathy, the human connection, the human network is about understanding your own human emotional system, this emotional energy that we've got, and being able to tweak and modify that and actually ground that. Again, especially as a leader, where you have to provide that grounded presence in the chaos of business, life, whatever it might be.
Yeah, we got two more questions. So I'm going to just, from Paul, would there be people who are physiologically wired to not be emotionally driven?
Yeah, look, Paul, it's, we have a logical slash emotional spectrum. And so, like I said earlier in the pack, you might just be a very logical person and maybe not overly emotional. We talk about, engineers, for example, very logically driven. And maybe, one of the challenges you've got as an SE or as a very technical person is maybe you don't have that EQ and that knowledge of that very well because you really like your logic, your processes, your structure. So that's generally what we do on that spectrum, that logical emotional spectrum, is that the emotional spectrum is usually the AE and the relationship side of things versus the SE is the more the logical perspective, right? The right side of the brain. So yeah, it's a variance, right? We all have different levels of emotional depth. And realistically, most of us don't actually know the depth of our own emotions without that self-analysis and self-awareness.
Yeah. So the questions are coming in thick and furious. You can tell me if you want to park some of them to later, or we handle one or two more now.
We can handle a
Um,
couple more now.
okay, great.
Oh,
So Melissa wants to know, how do we manage sunk cost fallacy sinking in, especially mid cold call?
yeah. Hello, Melissa. Melissa is, again, I've met her personally as well. So great question. Like, it really is, if it's a sunk cost, what is the cost of? Like, you've invested in that, sure, but you need to understand the depth of that investment. What does the sunk cost actually mean? If they're saying that they've already invested, there's no point, but when's the next window to open that up? Okay. Like, it might not be now, because your chances of actually nailing an opportunity now in the present moment are extremely small, right? Your chances of even getting a good cold call is like 1 to 4% on average. So then you would ask when, or what is the risk of not doing anything in that investment? Those are the two perspectives I would get. It really would be that's a very particular question depending on the context of it. But those are my two areas. Is like, is there a cost of not doing anything already being invested in that's at risk? Or when is the next best time to actually, bypass that fallacy into the next buying cycle, whatever it might be?
Right. And Rishika wants to know, which is it's a great question. With ongoing research aimed at enabling AI to understand human emotions, how do you see the role of human EQ evolving in the future?
Yeah, great question. So um, this is what I talk about, the people side of technology, is that AI is about knowledge. It's not about wisdom. It's not about applying that. And one of my theories, I've been building this academy for some time based on the theory that, AI will take care of logic. And to be great at technology sales, to be a good people person in technology, you need to leverage these skills within yourself to build trusted human connections, especially in the, upcoming future, where we're about to head into this really strange paradigm of where we're not going to know what's real and what's fake. So being able to temper and master these AI skills as a human being and use that in your engagements is extremely important to maintain that trusted human connection, because I think there is going to be a large degree, especially with sales leadership, where, again, this is biology, right? We might have had the latest in technology, but this is fundamental biology that will stay around, and building those trusted connections will get there. And I think there'll be a certain amount of society that repels or sort of, dismisses AI, right? And what it's doing for the human experience. So yes, AI will get better at understanding humans and being human, but very similarly to, I think humans will reject it to a degree. Some people will adapt to it and go, look, I'm happy to have an AI friend. And, I'm just being completely sucked in by the fact that this thing really knows me. But I think there's going to be a certain degree of people that go, I don't want to talk to a fake person, right? I think that's where we're going, is that there's going to be a certain rejection. I think there's going to be executive leaders that do not want to trust AI and want that human experience, that trusted personal connection. Because again, to be quite honest, less than 1% of people in the world understand this, like I've just put this out into the world. We feel it and we have an acknowledgement of it. We sense the vibe, but no one's actually said, this is the thing, right? And connected that dot. And when I teach this to my students, that's the real, oh, wow, right? That's the real snap into place of what they thought about the world. So that's my, my response to
Right.
that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. Do we need a certain type of emotional blindness to succeed in sales initially? Meaning that to try and not get stuck in analysis paralysis. So like you said, not being in your head so much, but being more in your body.
100%. Yes, absolutely. Especially, again, I've had anxiety my entire life, and I get stuck in analysis paralysis a lot. But sometimes you just need to suck it up and do the work, especially when it's things that are really annoying and painful, like cold calling or cold outreach, where it is that really frictional experience. You do definitely not, I wouldn't say emotional blindness, but that, like we talked about, the prefrontal cortex, and just self-regulating and not letting the anxiety take over us. We have to be mindful of the fact that irrespective of how we feel about the situation, we've got to do the work. And it just has to be done, right? So there is, cold calling sucks is a great example. Cold calling sucks, but it works. But you've got to get into a good emotional state and get out of that analysis paralysis. What if they reject me? What if it goes wrong? And that's a muscle that you flex over time and practice over time as well.
Amazing. Thanks. I guess we can move on to the next content. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. So what are these main EQ practices that we can actually, take away from this? So how can we develop this within ourselves? So there's 3 levers. There's 2 that I'm going to explain to you. One, we understand about empathy, but I'll dive into that a little bit more. So interoception is our function, our internal function of sensing our internal state. When we feel hungry, when we feel thirsty, when we feel sad within our body, the actual act of sensing that within our body is actually called interoception. And we understand that, again, at a relatively high level, but it's actually a skill that you should master and understand over time to identify your emotions, identify your dysregulated state. Because once we understand how that feels within ourselves, we understand when we're dysregulated, when we're stressed, when we're in survival mode, that gives us the intelligence to then see it in others and pick up on those cues as well. Okay, so like I say there, to master the outside world, we must master our inside world, because if we are just resonating with people, then we need to have that vibration and that frequency available within ourselves to understand and pick that up and sense that in others as well. So some of the core practices around interoception are the 3 things we've talked about here. Understanding your own emotional self-awareness, understanding when you are stressed, when you are drained, when you are reactive or in survival mode. How can you identify these cues within yourself? What are these common things that come up when you are stressed? How can you put a label to that stress of emotion so you're not operating from that distressed place? When it comes to emotional self-regulation, again, what we talked about just then, how do you know when you are not in the right state to be having the conversation, be doing work, making sure that you aren't just snapping at people because you are bottling up emotional energy that is welling up inside? And there are ways to self-regulate. A lot of them have become quite popular in the modern day, again, especially post-pandemic. Things like breath work, meditation. There's even things like vagus nerve stimulation, going for a walk, grounding. But essentially, all of these emotional self-regulation practices are to do one of 2 things. Either to ground yourself, because just as like energy, there's a positive and a negative pole. You are processing this energy. It has to go somewhere, right? So you're either processing it by journaling, therapy, talking to a friend, going to a break room, and you've seen those break rooms where you can just like smash plates with a baseball bat for money, whatever you need to do to get the frustration out. Or you self-regulate through the practices like breath work and grounding yourself and actually just processing those emotions without reacting to them. And that's the deeper practice that we've got here. And then what we talked about before, once you understand these emotions within yourself, you actually can attune to other people and sense those shifts. They're subtle, they're subconscious. We only are actually, so there's a framework called 73855, where realistically, almost, well, 93%, right? 7%, 93% of our communication is subconscious. 7% is verbal, 38% is non-verbal and tonal, and 55% is body language. So 93% of how we actually communicate is in the emotions, the tone, the facial expressions, right? This sense of not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, how are they positioned when they say it, how's their posture when they say it. And then as you master your own emotions and sensing those emotions in others, you become more empathetic. You are able to emotionally align with people and create that trusted personal network, which is so important in sales as well. The other lever that we've got is exteroception, and this is us externally perceiving emotions, tones subconsciously in the world, okay? So this is when we say we're a good people person, it's usually because we have a very keen sense of exteroception and understanding body language, mirroring, subconscious cues, when people like you, when people are engaged with you, when they're not engaged with you. We often also call this our BS detector, when you can sense someone is lying. This is the medical or scientific term for the BS detector. When you have that keen sense of people, you're actually a very honed user of your exteroception. So how can we improve on this, which is extremely important for us as salespeople, because again, we are always dealing with people all the time. Well, some of the practices that we've got here is learning to read people. Okay, so paying attention to those subconscious cues, the subtle shifts in tone, the body language. Are they paying attention? Are they looking you in the eye? What do you see beyond the eye? You know, we say that the eyes are the window to the soul. What do you see behind there? Do you see a lie bubbling around, or do you actually see honest truth coming from your customer? And then as we get better at reading people, we also get better at sensing people. Again, using that emotional attunement, sensing the vibe in someone, right? You can tell when your friend is in a bad mood. You can tell when they are withdrawn. Sometimes we know it, but we can't even explain it. You see a girlfriend, you go, love, you are glowing. What's going on here, right? Again, that is high emotional vibration that is emanating from us, and you are sensing that subconsciously. But then it becomes a conscious thought when you say, girl, what are you up to? You look great. Then again, we are sensing vibrations, emotional intent and tone. And when we go into a new room, when we go into a new environment, you go, what's the vibe like? What's the sense in the air? That's us reading the room. And again, that is us using our exteroception to go, it's a vibe in here, or what the hell's going on? And then how we combine those exteroception practices to develop relationships and align with the people that we're engaging with are things like mirroring, because birds of a feather flock together. We want to align ourselves by replicating the behaviors, the tone, to show that we are in alignment with that other person, right? So, for example, you might see when people are really having a good conversation, they're postured the exact same way. They've got the legs crossed together. They're leaning on the same thing together. Maybe you understand this, again, intrinsically, but you haven't really mastered it. But if you're coming in cheery to a cold call or a conversation, you're going, hey, how you going? And then the person goes, good, what is this about? You will not keep being cheery because you are misaligned with their emotional tone. And you might just come down, be a bit more measured, a bit more grounded, and go like, yeah, things are good. How are you going? Right? So we're adjusting and using our exteroception as the meta skill, and using all these sub skills and tactics within that as well. Last thing we want to talk about is empathy. We talk about empathy all the time in sales, in life, but what actually is empathy? And empathizing with people, again, is part of the broader emotional intelligence spectrum, and it's about understanding that emotional tone and sharing those feelings with other people. And they come in 3 different flavors. We understand usually emotional empathy. It's like when someone feels sad and you can sense their sadness, then we feel sad as well. We are actually aligning with their emotional tone and becoming empathetic to their challenges. Sometimes, like the question that was brought up before, you have cognitive empathy. So you can understand where they're coming from, but you might not be able to feel that within yourself. And that's very common for salespeople who are talking to CIOs and leaders that they don't actually know much about the solutions and the problems. you're cognitively empathizing with those problems. And you're going, well, I can't feel your frustration, but I know what frustration is, and I can understand cognitively that that is a challenge for you. And that's how we use empathy in sales, because we are really there to solve those problems for our customers, our people. And then we have compassionate empathy, and that is an innate drive and desire to help alleviate that stress. A great example of this would be charities, not-for-profits, which is one of my favorite customers. They're going, look, this child in Africa is starving. We've got families here that are in pain and struggling, and they're leveraging your emotional heartstrings, and they are trying to compel you to use your compassionate empathy to donate now. Provide, help us out. What can you do? And that's what they're doing, is they're leveraging compassionate empathy within you. Go and take another breath there. Is there any questions about that?
Amazing. I'll let you have a little drink of water and then I'll prepare the next question for you. So the next question is from Jonas. He says, can you share some practical tips when it comes to conflict management, when one reads and senses the other's vibe is not heading the same way?
Yeah, sure. So this is actually, a really good tip is to address the tension. So one of the things that you can actually do, because customers, again, people, just full stop, they acknowledge their emotional frustrations. For example, if the tone is shifting and you're seeing a customer is getting more frustrated, they can feel that within themselves, but they never are actually conscious of aware of it, you emanating that frustration to you as as the salesperson, as the account manager, whatever you might be. So actually addressing the emotional tone and tension in the room breaks it, and it actually shows a level of alignment to go, look, I can sense that you're frustrated here. What do you need to do about this? Because if you don't address that emotional tension, that's what builds. And then, for example, like I mentioned before, using your tonality shift. Okay, you make sure, I say this all the time with customers, if you are in a heated customer conversation, you need to be the most grounded person, because the leader of the conversation is the one that is the most grounded and present in the situation. I've dealt with hundreds of annoyed customers over my years in Telstra in particular, with deliveries that have gone wrong. And no matter what, you need to be the grounded presence and not let your emotionality be taken by them. Okay. And that can be hard at first, because you do feel your own frustrations, but the most grounded presence emotionally means that you are providing the direction of the conversation, and you are not going to be influenced by their frustrations, because they might not have as much EQ or self-regulation, and it depends on the irrationality of the conversation you're actually having. So a great tool, name it to tame it, which is, again, addressing that emotional tension in the room, so then you can have a real conversation about the subtext of the situation, and then making sure in any conflict that you maintain the grounded presence and you don't get your emotionality swept up in their frustration as well.
There's a question here which I feel that you probably just addressed in your last response, but maybe you want to add. It's just, when the cold call answers with non-cheeriness, what's the best way to go about it? Do you crack a joke? Do you try to get them cheery like you, or do you try and match their not great mood?
Yeah.
I think you've covered this, but maybe you can just summarize.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, mastering your emotional tone and the way you converse is a great leadership tool and a great conversation tool. So in a situation where the customer is, dull, annoyed, you still want to be a little bit more cheery, a little bit more optimistic. You do not want to be dissuaded and react to their lack of cheeriness, because if you are, in your prime cold calling state, you are out going into the world excited to share with customers how you can solve their problems. And they might be doubtful and skeptical at first, but you've got such a great value proposition for them that you're not going to be swayed by their frustrations, because ideally, if this solution is great for them, they're going to love it too, right? So that's always the perspective you should come from, is you should never be bothered by the tone. If you come in hot emotionally, like, and very cheery, and they go grounded, then you come down, within a similar frequency, but still happy, still optimistic, still unfazed by the situation, and you continue your conversation, your script, whatever it is.
Amazing. Kartik wants to know, what are some practical exercises to improve and train our introception and extraception.
Yep, so we'll cover that in sales and then some of the things that I just talked about before, Karthik. So self-observation, being able to sense your own emotional tone. I'm very big on meditation and as well. So there's breath work as well to help process some, some emotions. Yeah, I didn't want to get too deep into the practices, but if you want to have a conversation after this, I can give you some particular things that I've used for myself and with others as well.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. On to the last part. I'm a little bit conscious of time here, so we're up to the last section. And so now I've educated you. How do we use these things in sales, right? How can we leverage these? How can I give you these new sales superpowers and how can you use them every day in your business? So first of all, let's start with empathy again, because we always understand that within sales. You cannot be a great salesperson without a great empathy, because realistically, you are actually responding not just to the logical business challenges of the customer, but the emotional challenges and their emotional risk inside the business, usually some sort of status, so actually status is probably the big one, right? Is that just like when you make any large purchase decision, there is a risk there of your identity, of your ego, of how you're perceived by others. There's an emotional risk of harm that we need to negate and understand. Okay, so great AEs, the great people persons in technology sales, are those compassionate empathizers that actually just want to come in and solve customers' problems and look after them. Something that I talk about is, we just talked about emotional resonance. Trust. Trust is paramount in great relationships with your customers. You actually are getting into the trusted personal network, the trusted emotional network of your customers before you can get into the trusted technological network of selling them solutions. So when you do have those strong relationships with customers, you are the who you knows. You are inside the trusted personal relationship of the customer, okay? When we talk about stakeholder management, we're actually empathizing with the challenges and limitations of the different stakeholders in their business and understanding what their motivations are, what their challenges are, and sort of tempering your approach to each of them to make sure that you're taking them on the collective journey of your solution. Very often as well, when it comes to creating solutions, especially if you're doing a big, multi-architecture, complete transformation, complete roadmap like I've done, you actually want to be empathetic to a customer's limitations of how much they can take on in the projects, in the delivery, in the solution. Because yes, you want to make a bunch of sales and get a huge, fat commission check by selling them everything under the sun. But how much of that is actually going to be useful for them and actually contribute to their success as a customer, because you've given them too much, you've oversold it, or you've given them too many projects to do at once as well. So within interoception, within sales, we want to cultivate self-awareness, okay? Where are you emotionally, right? Most salespeople are operating at a low hum of anxiety and stress that gets elevated when you miss your commit or your forecast is off. And we're usually pretty good at keeping that to ourselves. And I call that duck mode. It's like we're all operating in the office, everything's fine, but in our heads, we are ruminating, we are stressing. And that is actually, a function of interoception. But you want to get better at understanding when you are stressed and when you are not. What's your emotional triggers? What are your physiological triggers, right? Do you shake your leg when you're irritated, right? Do you have a bit of a tick? Find that out, understand that. When it comes to self-regulation, now that you understand your emotions a bit better, or you can tell when you're frustrated, how can you process that better? How do you get rid of that frustration? How can you just breathe it out? Figure out some tools. I can share that with you after the fact. And then when it comes to improving your conviction, which is extremely important in sales, right? You want to understand, where do you lack confidence in your sales process? Where do you lack confidence in the way that you communicate with others about the value proposition? AEs are often, lacking confidence in the technical knowledge of what they sell and why. And that comes out in a lack of conviction in the way that they speak to customers, because inside their head, they're going, I don't know enough about this to talk to a CIO about it, right? We've all been there. I was like that for years, okay? So you have to use it as a sense of internal engagement of your own emotional awareness and engage with your emotional range as well. Exteroception in sales. We understand this probably a little bit more than interoception, because again, as salespeople, especially AEs in the people side of technology, we are using exteroception. We're just not necessarily aware of the science behind it. So for us as, as sellers, we want to utilize that empathy. We want to understand how frustrated are they? How can we emotionally align with their problems to create a deeper connection than someone that isn't focused on actually solving the customer's problems and just trying to shove a product down their throat? Again, what we sense subconsciously is sentiment, right? This is what we really are sensing as AEs and salespeople in particular. What's the sentiment? Are they resonating with your messages? Are they vibing with what you are saying about how this can solve their problem or not? Because if you're not vibing, that's pretty easy to figure out because they're not going to give you any attention, right? If they don't respond to your emails or your texts or whatever, you're not vibing with their current challenges or what their problems are to be solved. And if you're in a conversation with a customer, maybe you're in a demo, maybe you're in a meeting, you are always tempering and gauging that sentiment of the customer and guiding the conversation. That is what we do as salespeople inherently very well. And then, of course, we have our BS detectors, right? When we can tell that someone isn't telling us the truth, they might say one thing, but their tone, their body language, their presence says another, right? So we need to hone these skills and really understand people and sense when we're being bullshitted, okay? Another thing that's one of the last things I've got here, and that is often ignored by salespeople, is the concept of stranger danger. And unfortunately, most people, including ourselves, right? Sales is a negative stereotype. Most of us think of us as the shoddy used car salesman when we come out of nowhere and try and sell them something, right? Great movie there, Matilda, childhood classic. So immediately, right? You go into a shop and the salesperson comes up, hey, do you need any help? And you're just like, go away, right? I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anyone right now. I'll find you if I need you. I know where you're at. That is the stranger danger. That is the repelling of, ugh, you're just trying to take my money from me. I don't want you. You can probably smell or sense their sales breath, right? We've all talked about sales breath. So one of the things that we need to do ASAP, especially with cold customers and customers we don't have much of a relationship with, is negate the stranger danger and build a trusted relationship as soon as possible, right? And that is going, hey, we're cool, right? I am coming from a positive place. I'm well-intentioned. I'm here to solve your problems. And we use these social principles like having authority or having social proof of other customers or case studies and testimonials. That's how we build this trust to go, okay, people like me are actually using this solution. I should probably consider this as well, okay? So I'm going to summarize, we're very, running short on time here. To summarize this up, the vibe is real, folks. The vibe is real. It's emotional energy. The vibe is out there. It's a real thing. Science is finally catching up to what we intuitively knew all the time. Ironically, it's our intuition. So to improve our interoception, that practice of knowing the self, we need to be more out of our heads into our bodies, recognizing our pains, our frustrations, all those energetic shifts within our body to better understand ourselves. And then externally, we have to read and empathize with people and really double down on that emotional tone and sensing the vibe of the customer, of any stakeholder, right? Double down on that. People, again, this happened with me as well until I had this realization. Good salespeople, good people in tech are good at this, but they didn't know if this was a real thing. It's a real thing. So now that it's legitimized, double down on it, use it to your advantage. And then, like I said here, that sixth sense is our first sense, right? We have to rejig what we understand about the world and about ourselves. And again, who we resonate with, our vibe, who do we vibe with? That is our tribe. That is who we align with emotionally, intellectually, etc. And yeah, I think that's it, folks. I know we're over time. I think we've had a few questions, but that is my presentation. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Jameel. This was an amazing session. You gave us a lot of content to wrap our heads around, very valuable. For the few questions that came up, the recording will be shared with everyone that registered for this webinar. So rest assured, you'll be able to just look through it again as there's a lot of valuable nuggets in here. Thank you so much, Jameel. And for anybody that wants to connect with Jameel, he is on LinkedIn and Tech Sales Academy.
Yeah, I've got 2 slides at the end I could just show.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. So this is just
Amazing.
about Tech Sales Academy, right? So my academy is to fix the massive gap in tech sales education by giving you the complete curriculum of what it means to be a top AE based on my experience in education and learning. It's really about giving the tools and the complete education for the tech AE side, because it's such a challenge inside the industry to get all these skills and resources in one place. So if you want to join, I do have my own sales community there. You can take a photo there. I've got heaps of free resources in there for you, completely free. You actually can talk to me directly and have a Q&A with me about any questions that you've got. I'm a mentor, I'm a guide, I'm here to be your resource. So take a photo of that or use the QR code. Alternatively, one more ask. I'm actually in the hunt for an AE role again. So if you do have any account executive roles that are based in Melbourne or remote, please hit me up on LinkedIn or just connect with me on LinkedIn using the QR code there. Very open to a conversation. If you like what I'm about, please, let's have a further chat. And Yolanda, thank you very much for this.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Great.